สวัสดีนะครับทุกคนก็ขอบคุณมากที่กลับมานะครับเราอาจจะมีคนมากคนน้อยอาจจะเป็นเพราะว่าอาจจะเช้าไปหน่อยนะครับก็ยังไงขอบคุณมากที่มานะครับเพราะว่าเรามีการสนทนาที่น่าสนใจแน่นอนนะครับก็ so welcome back everyone. I know this is kind of like early morning but anyway I'm so delighted to have Joel with us like this morning, and also we're gonna do so many of his music during this afternoon. So maybe today this session we probably try to refrain about the theme that we are doing, the activities, and also to conclude today with kind of thoughts about your music and also the curation that we do it together. So how are you, Joe?
I'm doing really well, yeah. It's been a wonderful week. We had lots of rehearsals, lots of talks, master classes, and I think really for me the concert this afternoon is going to be a great celebration of everything we've done working with the Pastoral industrial aesthetic and all of these wonderful people and performers and new composers this week. It's been a real joy and an honour to be here, so thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So and as we see and rehearse your music, it's all incredible, and also there's a variety of like instrumentation, kind of like sound in each. I remember the flute piece. It's really mechanical in the way, and also there's other like the new commission piece that Dr. Thompson will give the premiere with the Young Contemporary Ensemble. So I'm very excited. Like, would you mind talking about these pieces? Kind of like let us know what we're gonna see this afternoon.
Yes, you've actually touched on the two instruments I was really most excited to write for this project, which was first of all the tuba as part of the quintet, and also the bass flute as well. You asked me because I think the bass flute's in 3 pieces, but I remember in our preliminary conversation you said, can you write for the bass flute? And something that was really exciting with both of those instruments, I think certainly the tuba is very underutilized in new music. I think there needs to be more music for the tuba. I think a lot of composers see it as this very limited instrument, and often when they write for the tuba, it just sort of gets long notes and boring parts and plays really quietly with the music, because they don't really know what to do with it. And in some ways, even though I'm a brass player, I think I sort of fell into that category. I was quite scared to write for the instrument. But as I started exploring it and started conversing with tuba players I knew, I discovered all of these techniques on the instrument that I didn't know were possible. The use of air sounds, because it has such a large pipe, you can really hear the subtleties and difference of aeolian sounds when you press down different valves. So it kind of ties into what you were talking about yesterday in terms of thinking about instruments as technology. And I couldn't help but think of, for example, Haydn's Trumpet Concerto. Now that piece was actually written for the first ever piston valve trumpet. Before that, trumpets were long tubes that just had holes that you would press down to get little adjustments in intonation, and you'd use your lips as well. And the first piston valve trumpet was invented that could play chromatically. And so the Haydn Trumpet Concerto begins with a fanfare to trick the audience, to make them think, oh, it's just going to be another typical trumpet concerto that sounds like lots of others we've heard. And then it comes in with the famous opening, F, G, A, and that gesture in itself is so groundbreaking for the trumpet. It's the first time it's playing in tune, diatonic, not just using intonation of the lips and the harmonic series, and later on there's a chromatic scale. So it's this really sort of groundbreaking work for the instrument. So yeah, writing for the tuba, getting to use these aeolian sounds, getting to use the tuba also with a baritone saxophone mouthpiece in it as well. Some really interesting sounds in there as well. Works really well for the trombone and lower brass too, so that was great. As for the bass flute, sort of the opposite to the tuba. It's quite often utilised in new music, but often I find it's used in quite a cliche way. You have lots of... Should we switch? Yeah. Can you hear me? Yep. Better, excellent. So the bass flute is often, for me anyway, I won't name names obviously, but used in quite a cliche way where you get lots of percussive effects and aeolian effects and some multiphonics maybe, and then the use of maybe some kind of pentatonic melody often appears a lot in bass flute pieces. So I was trying not to do that. So with the bass flute, I was really trying to think of these sort of dirty, kind of dull. The piece is called Charcoal Striations, Particulates of Dust.
Oh, cool.
And thinking about coal, how dirty coal is. You can't put coal anywhere or touch it or hold it without it leaving some kind of smear. And so what I did was I took these multiphonics on the instrument and the pitch collections that they created, you hear those at the beginning of the piece, and sort of really stretched them out and smear them across the duration of the piece, and then using effects like flutter tone and whistle tones and use of harmonics to kind of really dirty the sound and get this feel of kind of coal and minerals, and thinking about the instrument not only as elegant but also as kind of this sort of clunky beast at the same time. There's so much character to the bass flute, just like the tuba. Yeah, so that's been really, really great.
That's really cool. May I just respond on that? I think you touch a very, very interesting point. Like for me, like after listening to you, I have 2 points in my mind. Like first of all, your music is kind of portray the picture somehow. You know, like the way that you said about the coal, right? There's some kind of movement, right, when the coal kind of through the wind and then it's kind of smearing that you say, and I can hear it, you know, as a listener. I can hear, and you know, and it can like conjunct to the idea of like transition from pastoral to industrial, and then after that it could be somewhere else, right? So, and also another point is that you're a brass player, right? So I think you have kind of like influence from brass band somehow. I mean, at least background, maybe not influence. My apology, but like me too. I mean, I'm a trombone player, so I sometimes my music has some kind of that background as well. So I just curious, like, when you write these music, how do you use your background to create your own sounds, musical structure, like anything that you can share with us?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as a brass player, something which influences me so much as a composer is breath, breathing. It's so important to what we do as brass players, that kind of big, deep breath before you play, and then that sort of exhale. But when you think about the history of Manchester, which is obviously what is a huge influence on this connection of pieces, is with the rise of industry, it comes with the kind of the putrefaction and the pollution of air. And so all of a sudden breath goes from being this thing that helps you to survive to being toxic, because it's full of pollution and it's full of smoke. So I started with these pieces not only thinking about how to make the materials of the pieces breathe, but also what happens if that air that the materials of the piece are breathing is somehow toxic.
Yeah.
The pieces can't breathe properly in some way. The pieces are compromised. And how can I get that through to the performer in the way that I construct gestures? So certainly with the bass flute piece, for example, it really makes demands on the breath of the performer, because there are these long phrases, lots of loud multiphonics in places where the player really can't get enough time to get a breath in, but that creates this urgency, this sense of toxicity, I think, in the material that comes off in the way that it's performed. But also I was thinking a lot about time in these pieces as well, and thinking about the difference between mechanical and pastoral time. So mechanical time, this division of the hour into minutes and seconds and microseconds, etc., is really something that developed over the last 250 years. And obviously it was developed for sailing, for navigation. So it's kind of strange that we now live our lives through these really minute divisions of time. And actually, if you think about historically, we often assume that's how things have always been for mankind, and it hasn't. And there are places in the world where it still isn't that way. I think about a friend of mine who did some field research in Ethiopia, and she was staying in a rural town, but her offices were in the city. And when she arrived there, she knew that there were 2 buses per day to the city. And she asked, and she said, what time is the bus? And they said, the bus leaves at dawn. She said, no, but what time is the bus at? No, the bus leaves at dawn. So she looked up when dawn was the next day at about 5:30. And she rushed and got ready and made it to the bus. And dawn came and went. And she went to the driver and said, well, why hasn't the bus left? And he goes, oh, the bus doesn't leave until it's full. And all of a sudden she realised they had this completely different way of thinking about time that was to do with nature and also to do with human nature as well. And I was thinking about in these pieces, and especially the improvisation piece as well that you're going to hear, often as composers we think about how we're going to segment pieces in time before we think about the materials. I've been guilty of going, right, I've got a 10-minute commission, the beginning introduction passage is going to be 1 minute, then we're going to have a 2-minute flute solo, and it's this and it's that, before I even think about, well, what's actually going to be in these chunks of time.
Yeah.
And so in these pieces, hopefully it will come across in the form, I've really tried to think about material first. How does it breathe? How is that breathing compromised? And then how does that affect the development of the material through time? So I kind of forgot about, because with a lot of these pieces I knew we had to have about an hour and a half of music for the concert. But other than that, I thought, well, the pieces are just going to be as long as they need to be.
Yeah.
And so I just freed myself completely of this mechanical way of thinking about time and thought about it pastorally, contingent on the materials I was working with. And the form just really grows organically from what I have. A lot of these pieces I started at the beginning and just wrote all the way through to the end, and then went back and looked at what I had and started again in a way, and revised it by starting at the beginning and working to the end, starting at the beginning. And gradually the form just sort of, it's like kneading dough almost.
Yeah.
It sort of started getting thicker and broader. Certainly the commission piece, Sinkhole, that's how the material developed. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that's a really, I think I start to get excited when, a composer try to expose what, like the trick a little bit, like the way that, like, for example, you said about when you try to not, like, try to free, like, okay, I have this XX duration commission and then I want to go. So, like, how do you, like, for this, the sinkhole, right? How do you incorporate the materials from pastoral, industrial, like, how, like, is there any relation from your existing pieces? Sometimes composers have, like, series of composition, right? So, but for sure, like, we don't have to, but, like, is there any relation from other pieces? And also, what do you think about these new pieces? Is there any challenges? Because I know, like, we mentioned about tuba in the middle of every beat, like, I still think that tuba is a very interesting, instrument. So, well, like, to share with us about this.
Yeah, so first of all of the pieces in the cycle of pieces you're going to hear in the concert, it's called the Lowry cycle, name of the L.S. Lowry, the artist. I'll talk more about that later. They're all related in terms of they're all existing in a similar sound world which grew as I wrote more of the pieces within the cycle. So actually, quite serendipitously actually, the order that you're going to hear the pieces is the order that they were written. So the bass flute solo comes first, then the violin solo, then the duos, the trios, and then Sinkhole. And so I think Sinkhole, it's nice it's at the end because what you hear is all of the pieces which sort of contributed to the totality of what will be in that sound world. And obviously Sinkhole is this natural phenomenon where you have these cracks in the ground that are filled with water. And then as the water table goes down, what ends up happening is all of those cracks, they dry out and they collapse, and so all of the land collapses down into this sinkhole. And often sinkholes are a man-made phenomenon because of humans interfering with nature and interfering with the water table. And so what I do in Sinkhole is take a lot of these musical materials from other pieces and gradually sort of in this spiral collapse them down. And so in the sections of the piece, what you hear is sort of these renderings of the previous sections, slowly becoming sort of more aeolian, more dust-like, until you end up really in this sort of, the last section of the piece is quite an alien world, even for me as a composer. You've got the air sounds in the tuba, you have the use of kind of this scraping of the glass bottles, these very percussive sounds, but then all of a sudden this really high harmonic melody which appears in the strings, which just sort of, it came really from the compression of lots of other pitch materials from other pieces, and as I slowly sort of ground them down and wore them away to their absolutely simplest form, I discovered I had this really sort of beautiful falling melody. And I almost thought about not using it because it's almost sort of tonal. But I thought, well, maybe this is where I'm getting from the totality of this process of writing all of these pieces. I've got somewhere new as a composer at the end, and that felt really, really refreshing. Maybe I should talk a bit about L.S. Lowry. That might be a good place to go on to. So L.S. Lowry is an artist who, if you talk to anyone from Manchester, the city of Manchester in the UK where I'm from, really is a household name. He was an artist that was alive during the late 1800s and the early 1900s and painted lots of depictions of Manchester and London during the Industrial Revolution. And what he managed to capture was the real grit and the pollution and the factories and the dirty water of the lakes and the canals and the trains and the labour and the work of industry in Manchester during that period of time, but also the resilience of the people as well in his figures. They call them matchstick men. You see all these people sort of running across the foreground of his pictures. They're sort of huddled over in crowds, and that they're working though. They're people that work very, very hard for the prosperity of the city during the Industrial Revolution. And so his art has always had a profound impact on me as someone who comes from Manchester and very much grew up in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution of the city, which had a lasting impact. And through my lifetime, I've really seen the gentrification of the city. In a way, in some ways, I don't recognise Manchester now as the Manchester it was maybe 20 years ago. Certainly for my parents, they often talk about that a lot, how much the city has changed. But perhaps thinking about how that relates to the form of Sinkhole in a way, where I've taken all of these sort of pastoral, industrial, polluted materials and gradually worn them down, and actually they sort of, this maybe sounds a little bit cliche, but sort of gentrified themselves into this kind of really beautiful sort of sparkling texture which emerges right at the end of the cycle. So in your program notes, when you're listening to the pieces, I really encourage you, obviously there's some text with each of them, please feel free to read it, but the pictures, the paintings by L.S. Lowry are actually for me more impactful on what I was thinking about when I was writing the pieces. So if you could have the paintings in mind when you're listening, I think that will be just as fruitful as reading the program notes and understanding the context.
That's really cool. Actually, I mean, when I did a program, and when you sent me, the picture is really beautiful. I can see like every single, like, it's kind of like portray the sound a lot. And when I listen to the music, I really recommend everyone to look at and read that. So, yeah, I just have some sort of personal question, because you flew from, is it your first time in Thailand?
Yeah, it is. So it's my first time here in person. Obviously, I've collaborated virtually before with the Tassetti ensemble and with you. That's how we met. So yeah, it's great to finally sort of be here and experience Bangkok. So I've researched it so much as part of this project, and obviously because it's expensive to come here, I would have loved to have visited while I was doing my research. Yeah. So I've only really got to know it through sort of Google searches and the internet and talking to people. So yeah, it's great to be here, because I was running around most of my mornings recording field recordings of Bangkok for the improvisation workshop that I did yesterday. So that was a really great way to get acquainted with the city, and then immediately turn it into something artistic, which was great. Yeah.
That was actually exactly the reason I asked, because sometimes we are an artist, right? And then we travel. We can observe the city, we observe the urban, we observe the greeneries, we try to be within the environment, and at the same time, for this like SonicSculpt project that we do together, it's more like kind of like having you be here as our artist in residence. What is your experience staying in Bangkok? Like, is there something that different from England? Or it's the UK, sorry. Is there anything that you like to share, the similarities, differentiations, which leads you, let's say, how you get commissioned, I don't know, like some like culturally that you can share with us, because like some of us interested in composing internationally, maybe you can share with us.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess, a word I can use to describe sort of my feelings of Bangkok at first, and it's a word that sounds quite negative, but I don't mean it in that way if I explain. It's sort of oppressive, but in the sense of like here, compared to somewhere like Manchester, where obviously it's a lot colder, but because of the humidity and the heat and the atmosphere feels a lot thicker and it's a lot busier than Manchester. There's so many people and the tall buildings and the cars. I just felt it almost kind of claustrophobic at first because everything feels just so much closer. It feels like there's so much less space in the city, but in a way that was really sort of interesting for me as a composer and really sort of cathartic actually to be in a space in a city where all of a sudden I felt so much closer to the atmosphere in the space. Because the thing about Manchester, and it's a problem with Buffalo as well, which is the city I lived in when I was in the US, that has a similar history, again, a post-industrial history to Manchester and Bangkok, is there are places that are quite empty because it was designed for a much larger population than currently lives there. And so when the Industrial Revolution ended, lots of people left. And so there were these strange sort of wide open spaces in the city where there's no one there. And everything feels quite sort of, what's the word? Eerie and sort of bleak and dystopian. You feel quite melancholy. But then coming to Bangkok, everything all of a sudden feels just so much closer together. So artistically, yeah, that was sort of my experience of the city.
Is it like affect somehow the idea of composing? Like, would you take this experience to write some pieces, or is that anything that kind of affect you? This is what I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I mean, what I was saying earlier about this idea of not quite being able to catch your breath, I think it's something I really want to push further in future pieces, and this sort of claustrophobia. Because previously I was thinking about it in relation to pollution, but actually coming here, instead thinking about it in terms of like humidity and heat. And there were times here where like I found myself sort of standing still outside, and I realised all of a sudden I'm out of breath. And I'm like, but I've not moved. And it's the heat that really sort of gets to you. And I was thinking about in future pieces sort of how I can draw that kind of strange, uncanny feeling into my pieces. Speaking of the uncanny, actually, I do have a question for you, if that's okay.
Please.
Because you were talking about yesterday in your really illuminating talk with Kenneth about you like to use technology in your pieces to trick the listener, where they don't really know what is acoustic, what is live, and what is technology. And to me, maybe there's this link there with the pastoral and the industrial through the uncanny. And for me, because I don't use technology very much in my pieces, and when I have, it's mostly click tracks and fixed media as well, not necessarily so much that's responsive live or so much even that you can hear. The click tracks the performers can hear, but obviously as the listener you don't hear it. So as a composer that's looking to expand into that in future works, I was wondering how you approach the uncanny and through the use of technology in a lot of your pieces. Is that something that's influential?
Definitely. I think this is very, very interesting because it is related to the project to, like this time, because I have a philosophy for myself that not everyone specializes in everything. Like I try my best to, let's say I know computer music, I know trombone, I know composition, but I want to make sure when I share it out, it could be, I try to avoid the word accessibility, because I think like everyone has different sides of accessibility, but to me, like at least, let's say if I do like computer music piece, I want to make sure that people can consume, like kind of like, sorry, in other way. I want to make sure that I can explain, that like for example, yesterday we have like young composer. He's here. Yeah, he was talking about the seaweed, right? He was talking like the thing, but at the same time, like I'm not expert in CV, you know, like I have zero research on that, but at the same time I wanna like computer music, like not everyone like know how to, you know, DAC, ADC, you know, like input output, but like I try to make sure to bring it out, like to present like in the way that we all can grab it, and then invitational, you know. So this is a kind of like the way I do. So so for the way I use technology, even though like AI script, you know, I had one piece worked with Soundless for, it's called, what is that called? Shrimp. Yeah, it's called Shrimp. It's kind of a piece for quartet with my instrument called Shrimp, like, and then with electronics, and we had I did AI generative visuals and sounds, kind of like respond like talking with the instrument, like the instrumentalist, something like that. So, but at the same time, like performers, they don't know how to make it, right? And they don't have to, right? But like I just try to create an interface that everyone can connect to each other, you know. So it's like I use this word, I mean this explanation to some of my students many times, like, okay, like just being audio interface, because like you can get any types of microphone in, you know, or like any types of connect to any types of speakers, you know. So you can get any input, you can go to any output, and I think it's interesting because like sometimes we have a crappy audio interface that, oh, it's not compatible with this kind of input output. So, but in my philosophy, I want to make sure that my music, my thought could connect in and out with people, with, you know, like for example, having you here, it's great, you know, like it's great to connect, having Ken, having like people from over the world, Kugante from Japan, you know, it's kind of like join restaurant after, you know, something like that.
Yeah, I think the way you put it yesterday that I loved was thinking about sort of composers, well not just composers, but I think any musicians in the field of music we're working in as technicians in a global network.
Mm-hmm.
And what we all love is this labour that comes with working with technology in the way that we do to discover and to find new things, whether it's through electronics or through finding new sounds for instruments or mixtures of the two. We all have this common joy that comes from working with and experimenting with technology.
Yeah.
And I think that's what has got us all here today. And because you asked me a bit about, I think earlier, about sort of did you mention like how I get commissions?
Yes.
Yeah. I've never received a commission from something I've applied for. For me, like every commission I've ever received has been from people I know.
I see.
Through developing my network, getting to know people, being introduced with people. And for me, there was a point where I felt really despondent, where I was applying to all this stuff and I couldn't get a commission from things I was applying for, but I was getting commissions from my friends. And I realised all of a sudden, well, surely that's the joyful thing, that I have this network of people that want to work with me and we share these common interests. And it makes the composition process and the collaboration process much more personal, because I'm working with people I know rather than these sort of, in a way, faceless figures you only really know by name, and then you send off the piece and then you don't hear from them and they perform it and it's great, but there isn't really any kind of narrative. And hopefully for me, this concert today, it's going to start a future narrative working with these wonderful performers I've met through this process, and obviously Tassetti and working with you, and it's developing this sphere of enjoyment with what we do. Yeah.
That's great. I think you touched the right point, because I mentioned, you know, sometimes I mean, my apologies. Sometimes when I throw the question, I try to put a lot of keywords so that we get out more. So like the reason I put like, oh, how you get commission, right? So it's about like Marianthi Papalexandra, my former teacher. She did a course. She's a great artist, by the way, but like she did a course called Composing Network which is the best chord that I had in my life. It's like, it's not about learning composition, but it's learning about how we can react to people. You know, that's a bunch of like kids who like get one commission from someone, right? And the way they approach to performer, like the performer gives the labor, right? Like, hey, I play music for you. Like, but some people like, no, like you, that's terrible. You know, it's not a nice way, right? But like, if someone just like a little bit more, what do you think about this? Shall we do this together? And then create a kind of collaborative process. Then new commissions. This is for me. Like I remember, I think my first, oh my God, boy, 10, 12 years ago, I still at Mahido, one of the institutions in Thailand. I had no commissions. I was just like undergrad student and just like compose music for free with friends. People play my music a lot, and you know. But then there was one time there's a person from Korea came here, like artist, and I said, oh wow, this is a cool piece. Shall we do it in Korea? I said, oh yeah, cool, thanks. And then they just do it there. And when I went to Korea, and people in Korea who came from Germany, and it's, oh, this is a cool piece. And it's kind of like bouncing around, you know. So I just feel like I totally agree with you. Most of my commission as well came from people I know. So I just feel like this is a kind of like creating community somehow. Like I think right now, at the end of this conversation is that we kind of like beyond what does it mean pastoral, what does it mean industrial, but now it's more kind of global in the sense that even though COVID broke many things, but it's not anymore, to me. It's just like, actually it's kind of open more pathways, like online, anything that could, you know, potentially get you more works or create something different. So this is what I want to say, like, you know, I think like this is very cool to have you here, like to play a bunch of your music, commission you, and for sure the ensemble will, you know, we keep repeating the music that we do. So not just like one performance, bye-bye, you know, it's just like we just do. So great. I just like want to thanks to you like for being here, and anything that you like to express before we move to another session.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. As I said at the beginning, it's been an absolute honour. I just wanted to quickly touch on, I remember watching an interview with a very famous composer, who I won't name, who was saying there were too many composers, there are now too many people doing what we do. You know, there's no kind of quality check, etc. And I just found I completely disagreed. I thought, well, no, actually, in some ways it's a joyous thing that there are more people than ever doing what we do, because as you say, it opens up more avenues and networks to be able to make art together. And yes, there are lots of people doing what we do, which means there's more competition, if you want to think about it that way. But actually, through talking to people and through collaboration, I think it breaks down the walls between just being a composer or just being a performer or just being a technician or whatever. You can work on each other's pieces.
Exactly.
And come together to create festivals like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just to reflect that I think the opposite. I think we don't have enough people. You know, we just
I agree.
need more people to, you know, because like sometimes people, I've been in touch with several Thai composers and people struggle. You know, like, oh, there's no place to perform. I get only like a couple $100 for this piece, you know, or it's not enough to live, right? But like, I still have a belief that if, you know, like us, like doing keep an eye on any grants, anything like endowment, anything. I think like it would come from the heart, right? The heart that like we want to do. So and then we will make it happen. I think a little cheesy ending, but
But it's a nice end. It's a positive ending. I think that's what we got out of this. Great.
Cool. Any last thing to say?
No, just a final thank you to you, to all of the performers, to all of the amazing music, and to all of the young composers as well who are here. It's been absolutely wonderful, a great experience. I hope I come back to Bangkok very, very soon.
Please.
Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much. So please give a warm applause to our Artist Investment Joel Kirk.